if you're hearing this, it's because it's actually recording. All right. Welcome back to another Q&A with Professor Dave Berri. If you are watching this live or watching the video cast and my camera goes wonky, my dog is right underneath my desk and may hit the camera. Anyway, back with us as always it's weird. On the Box Score Geek show, I introduced myself as the host first, Dave, but obviously this show is about you, but you will be guest. So welcoming back our regular guest, Professor Dave Berri, professor of economics at Southern Utah University, author of a billion books and papers and everything. Your textbook's coming out, Dave. Want to shout that out a little before we get going?
Yeah, it went to print, so it's the textbook, which is cleverly called Sports Economics. It's coming out in about 3 or 4 weeks, so this is a major deal for me. It's been 6 years in the making. So after Stumbling on Winds was finished, I went to work on this, and it took a lot longer than I thought it would take. But it is now coming out, and so that'll be good. So we'll see how well that gets received.
I was going to say, I would actually claim, kind of Stumbling on Winds, from my perspective, you're almost a victim of your own production there, in that I think that came out incredibly quick after Wages of Winds. And
actually, it was 4 years later.
4 years?
It was 4 years later.
Really? All right. Well, maybe I'm just okay. So
you're getting older. See, time is now going faster for you, but it actually took 4 years to write that. It did not take 4 years to write that. It took. It probably took a couple years before we got the contract, and then I don't think I worked on it really hard right away, and then it picked up steam, you know. But it was actually 4 years. Yeah, Wage of Winds is 2006. Stumbling on Winds is 2010. Sports Economics is it'll be officially 2018 is I think the official publication date, but it'll be available in November.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a book person, so I don't know how they count things official. I'd count that as 27. If you can get it in 2017, seems. But
yeah, but I think the website. I think Macmillan Press, Macmillan's one of the bigger, it's the giants in textbook publishing, and they listed at 2018. But you know, I don't know how that all works. But it's probably 2018 because it's a textbook, so it's used for classes. It's not going to be used in the fall because it's
And by the way, just using that as an introduction, this is just to recap for those that are new to the show. This is why we have you on every week, Dave. In terms of advanced basketball statistics, the reason we like you as a guest, we've always been a fan of your work. You know, you are basically the grandfather, father, however you phrase it, of the Box Score Geeks. You are an expert who knows what you're talking about and actually do this professionally. A lot of the people that write blogs, ourselves included, myself and Patrick included, we do this as a hobby. We don't do this as a living. That's why we like deferring to you and not random websites as to whose expertise you should listen to.
Yeah, there are a lot of random websites, aren't there? Yeah, apparently, you don't need to be very qualified to talk about this stuff. What I've noticed over the years is that the key is just to adopt the tone that you're an expert. That seems to be the key.
Adopt it, and I mean, you just have to get a few favorites of people that just start quoting. I mean, that, to be fair, that was what happened with Wages of Winds back in the day, and unfortunately tailed off. I think in large part because ESPN just went away. A lot of the people we knew at ESPN that used to promote your work regularly have left and been let go. Unfortunately, because they changed their tone. But you know, it's just you get a mainstream publication to use you over and over and over again, and people will assume you're an expert. No one actually does the due diligence of looking up the statistics of the people.
That's not just true in sports. That's true everywhere. I mean, that's you know, I teach obviously I teach economics, so I teach history and I teach macro, and I explain to a lot of my students that a lot of the stuff we talk about in class is based on data you can look up online, and you can see people who claim they're experts saying things that completely contradict what the data says, and there's no one to check on them because nobody ever looks up the data. No one ever bothers to check what they're saying. So this is that's just universally true. People are not very statistically adept, and they're not really willing to put in the work to figure out whether something is true or not.
But luckily, you are back in the fray of being a regular writer on the web, because that was your case before the textbook tanked your production on wasting time on the internet, which is probably a good thing. But for those that don't know, you write regularly at Forbes once a week, but you are committed to write 5 times a week. So for those of us,
5 times a month. So 1 week, that's that 2.
I said week there, but yeah, month. For those of us, we were talking this pre-show. For those of us that have done the bi-weekly pay schedule, there are those months with 5 weeks. So sometimes you'll get paid 3 times, and those are like the awesome months. The same applies actually for mortgages. If you change your monthly payment to bi-weekly, you'll pay down your mortgage faster. And the real trick is because you have 2 months where you pay 3 payments instead of 2. So this was the extra mortgage payment week last week. You wrote 2 articles, one on the U.S. softball team, and then one on tanking in the draft lottery in the NBA. We're going to start with softball. I've got a question for you, Dave. Have you ever seen the movie Miracle? It's about the 1980s U.S. Hockey team.
I didn't see the movie. I was alive when it happened.
That's an amazing movie.
I don't need to see the movie. I was alive when it happened. I remember it happening.
Probably weren't in locker rooms or in the tryouts or whatever.
No, but I do know it happened.
All right. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend Kurt Russell in the movie Miracle. I believe it's still the highest grossing hockey movie ever. And I wasn't alive when 1980s Miracle on Ice happened, so it did make sense for me to watch it. The reason it came to mind is I don't know if this is true or not. In the movie, there's supposed to be tryouts for the Olympic hockey squad, and they all show up in Colorado Springs, and it's supposed to be a week-long tryout and whatever. And after day one, Kurt Russell or Herb Brooks in real life says, "I've decided who's made at least the first list. Everybody else go home." So that had me thinking of this because you were talking about USA softball. You've done some articles on the fast pitch league, some articles on college softball. And you were saying if we just looked at the stats, here are the players that I would put on my USA softball team. And I was wondering if you'd be the same way as Herb Brooks back in the day. You wouldn't have lots and lots of tryouts. You just very quickly prune lots of people.
Well, I think, one of the things that I would point out is that Kelly Critchman wrote an article about this, and there's this controversy between the professional league, the National Pro Fast Pitch League, and then and USA Softball. And USA Softball had a tryout a few months ago, and they didn't invite some of the major stars of National Pro Fast Pitch. There's this conflict between these two, and Kelly Critchman wrote about this because she wasn't one of the ones invited. And Kelly Critchman is the star of softball. She's a phenomenal. To put her in baseball context, Barry Bonds would be the Kelly Critchman of baseball. I mean, Kelly Critchman is way better than everybody else in terms of what she does.
So actually, I'll give you a chance to explain. So in this article, you list a bunch of players and you list like some basic statistics. You do have, I believe, OPS. I forget what that stands for.
It's on base percentage plus slugging average.
Okay, I'm going to leave that off because I do not know baseball or softball, so I'm not even pretend. But can you explain it's RCAB or is it RCAB statistic that you use?
Okay, it's runs created per at bat, and this is actually from my textbook. And so what you do is you just do a simple basic regression. There's 2 ways of doing it, but I use a simple regression. And you just regress a team's runs on singles, doubles, triples, homers, stolen bases, double plays, sacrifices, anything that goes into runs. And then from that regression, you get the coefficient. What's a single worth? What's a double worth? What's a triple worth? What's a home run worth? And then you simply multiply the coefficients by the player's stats, and that gives you how many runs they created.
And so this is nuts. Based on this, I don't know softball as well as I keep mentioning. I just want that clear so no one takes me as an authority based on our pre-talk. So obviously, just putting us in baseball terms, if it's like baseball, Kelly Critchman produces half a run per at bat. So that means like in standard baseball games, half a run on her own.
Yes, on her own, she produces half a run per at bat. I think I figured out she produced 3% of all runs in the league, and she's only on one team. so
you mentioned the Barry Bonds. I'd actually be interested, Kelly Critchman, the Barry Bonds of fast pitch.
That's really who she is. And I would point out, we already know that Barry Bonds cannot hit fast pitch pitching. This was already established. Jenny Finch was the star pitcher in the 90s, and she actually faced Barry Bonds in an exhibition, and she actually faced a number of Major League All-Stars, and it was well established that Major League All-Stars cannot hit fast pitch pitching because they simply have no experience with it, and they do not know where they're supposed to swing because they're not used to doing it. Kelly Kretschmann obviously can hit fast pitch pitching, and she hits it very well. And so she's the major star. And again, Team USA USA Softball did not invite her to the last team. So they've corrected that for this team. For this team, they've corrected that. They've invited some. They invited 61 women. About half of them come from the professional ranks. So to sort of put that in context, if you were to build a dream team in the NBA for the Olympics and you only invited half the players to tryouts were NBA players and the other half were college players, I think you'd be wondering, why are you doing that? Why don't you just invite professional players? So in this article, what I said is, let's just say it's just professional players. You only invite those who have professional experience. Who would you have invited, and what would your team look like if you based it strictly on the numbers? And so basically what I'm saying is you're treating the National Pro Fast Pitch experience as the tryout. So you tried out all last summer. You played the whole season. I got to see what you did. These are your stats. I am ignoring defense, so I'm not. So that is a problem. So
that's going to be my next question. So I mean,
you're leaving out defense. So there's no.
I'm curious your opinion as to how much that matters, because I know obviously we have a lot to discuss in the future about Moneyball. I know you have a paper on that. But, at least the narrative that was fed in the book Moneyball is they just left that on the table. They basically said, we're going to go for undervalued things. So we're going to go for pitchers that are underrated, and we're going to go for batters that get on base. And they didn't worry as much about defense.
I would think that's a mistake. I'm saying that just simply from my experience as a Detroit Tigers fan. The Tigers have, the last 10 years or so, built teams that are heavy on great pitching, heavy on great hitting, and they can't catch a goddamn thing. And I think ultimately that was their Achilles heel, is that they just were not very good fielders. And so you'd have a phenomenal pitcher, and you see a lot of cheap hits. You see hits that other fielders would have stopped, and your fielders can't stop them. So I would think defense is very hard to measure. But I think defense matters. But I don't have the data on defense for softball, really. There's very little data on that. Just the classic data on errors and things of that nature. But it's not like Major League Baseball where there's a lot of systematic data. Like
for you, your tryout for the USA softball team, the things you're saying, you just invite the pros. I think, honestly, I would just say, Kelly, I don't want you to get injured. You're on the team. Just stay. I mean,
yeah. I would think so. And Kelly Kretschmann is not the only phenomenal player, but she is actually her runs created per bat 0.503, and next on the list is what is it? Brittany Cervantes. She's 3.54. So I mean, it's way ahead of number 2. And so yeah, she's just phenomenal. There's 2 phenomenal athletes in National Pro Fast Pitch. Kelly Kretschmann is way above every other hitter. Monica Abbott is way above every other pitcher.
Metric to the listeners too, and me. I'm not even going to pretend I know the FIP. I believe that's fielding pitching.
Independent pitching. So this is something that was developed by Boris McCracken. One thing about, we should probably say this. One thing about baseball versus basketball, and this is really where the Wages of Win sort of started, is when I started doing research on basketball in the 90s, so 20 years ago or so, there was a problem. If you want to do research on baseball, lots of people have come up with lots of measures in baseball that work perfectly well for academic research. They're perfectly valid. So the runs created model that I use is actually from an article written by Asher Blass, who's an economist. And he wrote this in 1992. And Asher Blass's paper is based on, his model is based on the work of Pete Palmer, who was a sabermetrics person in the 70s. So Asher Blass did not come up with this. This was a sabermetric person who did this. And same thing is true with fielding independent pitching. Boris McCracken came up with this. It was published online. And all it simply says is, if you want to evaluate a pitcher, you can't use earned run average or wins losses. You have to focus on what the pitcher has control over. And those are strikeouts, walks, home runs, and hit batters. Those are the things that the pitcher does that does not involve any fielders. Everything else involves fielders. And so what the model is basically this. You take a player's earned run average, you regress it on strikeouts, walks, home runs, and hit batters, and then you regress it also on the 5th variable is hits per bat, some measure like hits per bat. And what that takes into account is how many hits you gave up per bat, and that's dependent on your fielders. And so you then take that model and the coefficients from that model, and you forecast the player's ERA, and you substitute in for the hits variable, you substitute in the league average. So what would be your ERA if your defense was just average? And that's your fielding independent pitching ERA. Everyone gets the same defense. We're now evaluating strictly on the things that you do as a pitcher.
I actually really like that this is Q&A, and since I don't know softball, I'm going to have lots of Q&A. It's not like, us just having minor discussions, so it's more of the title. But another question I have, I know in baseball, this drives me crazy. Stadiums are all different. There's the green monster at Fenway, so you're not as likely to give up home runs to left-handed hitters. The Yankees made their stadium, so it's incredibly hitter-friendly. The Rockies, irrespective of how the field look, there's altitude. How is softball in terms of field? Both.
Okay, that's softball right now. National Pro Fast Pitch is in its infancy, and so I don't know where their fields actually stand right now. I don't know. I don't know this for certain, but I'm guessing that they don't have fields built for them. They're borrowing fields from other people.
Okay.
And so I don't know exactly how that varies. It also is the case that National Pro Fast Pitch, they have teams obviously based in different markets. So the Scrapyard Dogs are actually the Houston team. USSA Pride is the Orlando team. Texas Charge are the Dallas team. Obviously Akron is from Akron. Chicago is from Chicago. But not only do these teams play in those markets, they also tour. They go around the country and play in different places. So it's very much like basketball was in the early 15, 20 years of its history. They played around in different places. So as we all know, Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game is in Hershey, Pennsylvania. It's not in Philadelphia. His home team. They were taking that game on the road to see what they could get. They got 4,000 fans to show up. So and so that's how national, so it is the case. The fields are, I'm sure, are different. And that's just part of the way baseball and softball has always been. You build the fields however you wish to build them.
Okay. Well, yeah, I didn't know if it mattered, because I would imagine that would matter too. But then also just looking at this, Monica Abbott, you already wrote the $1 Million Arm article, how she probably had one of the most spectacular finals performances. You put it out there, Dave. We'll revisit you in 30 years. You basically said that performance is probably one for the ages, and in 30 years we'll still be talking about how it was.
I fully expect, given what I understand of the history of sports leagues, that women's sports will be a lot bigger in 2, 3, 4, 5 decades than it is now. And I fully also expect that when that happens, people will look back at what happened before, and it's very much like the thing with the NBA. John Havlicek steals the ball is probably not a huge moment in 1965 sports. I mean, if you were to go back in time in sports and ask people in 1965 what was the most impressive events of the year, I don't think John Havlicek making a steal in the Eastern Conference Finals registers with people, because basketball's so small at that point. I don't think people care. But it becomes a big deal because they keep talking about it, and the NBA explodes 20 years later.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it's like people look back and go, oh, this happened. Because what happens when the league explodes is all the people who've been there the whole time, they start telling stories. Oh, you think this is great. What, you should have been there when they did this. And so what's going to happen 20, 30 years from now when these leagues are bigger, people are going to go, oh, you think this pitcher is great. You should have seen Monica Abbott. She did this. And see, and then that becomes a much bigger thing. And the fact is, it was televised, and there will be a video of this. And so they'll go back and revisit all this. And I think that's true. I think a lot of these things, same thing in the WNBA, Minnesota Lynx playing the LA Sparks will be a much bigger deal 20, 30 years from now. It's, right now these leagues are small because they haven't been around very long.
I do find YouTube and the internet is amazingly interesting, or even Twitter. You've got little video things where, yeah, you can see the big plays much sooner, and they catch on. So that's definitely remarkable. I'm trying to think about, this is a great article if you haven't checked it out. So as mentioned, it's called The Dream Team for USA Softball. Your argument is they should invite the pros, which doesn't seem like a controversial statement for an Olympic team. You're saying there are 2 amazing players, and you list some other, you said there are some really, really good ones. The only real thing you said is defense. I'd be curious your opinion there. Are there defensive statistics or people that you would use, or would you actually use the tryout to try and go for defense?
Yeah, I don't think the data is actually collected for National Fast Pitch. I think you'd have to actually think about who you got defensively. A lot of these hitters, there's not that big of a difference. So I think you invite the best hitters and then see who's the best defensive players among that group. I will note my next article for which I'll probably put up on Thursday will be the dream team for college softball. So then I'm going to ask. So the question there is, what if we just looked at softball players from college? What would be your dream team then? They did invite 30 or so women from college. If you look at the data, they left out some people that were ranked higher. So I'm gonna think about that, write about that. So
the last stupid question, which I've got to imagine. Oh, please don't play. Sorry, I was autoplay out on your article, Dave. I was going to say this is always a stupid meme that comes up in professional sports, basketball in particular. Could a college team beat the Philadelphia 76ers, et cetera? I can't imagine based on how some of these numbers, but could your college all-star team either compete in national fast pitch or compete at the Olympic level, in your opinion? Is it still at that level, or are the better?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. That's a tough one. I don't know. Judging by what we know of other sports, the answer is no. But I do know, a number of these women do come in right out of college, and the way is seasons overlap. So you actually leave the College World Series, and then a number of these women a couple of weeks later are playing National Pro Fast Pitch, and there's no minor league. They go right to the pros, and they do compete. They do compete right away.
Well, I also know this was the case back in the history of the NBA, for instance, right? You have no incentive if you are a star college player right now to leave college early, because I don't think the pay discrepancy is enough, right? If you're an NBA player, why would you stay till you're a senior? But in the 60s, right, it was commonplace, in part because of the rules, in part because other things, that you would stay 4 years in college. So I'd imagine you have older players that are much more.
They're all seniors. They're all seniors when they leave, and so yeah, that is the case. So I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I still haven't. The problem is, I'd like to do a study of how the softball college stats translate to the pros, but we only have 5 years of college data. NCAA doesn't report anything before 2012, so it kind of limits what you can do there. So I don't know. Let's talk about this basketball paper then. Let's
look for that paper in a few years. If you're listening to this in the future, hopefully that paper comes out in a few years. I really hope so, because I helped with the softball data, so I'd love to see that.
You're a huge help on this.
All right, so let's talk your other one, Dave. You just got to be a downer. Of course, I'm in the same boat. I'll give a little anecdote on myself. I was bashing one of Lonzo Ball's, one of the rookies that's supposed to turn around a team. I was bashing his performance. He put up an amazing stat line. I think it was 29 points, 10 assists, and 8 rebounds or something like that, or whatever. An impressive line. There's some people saying this hasn't been done. He's like the first teenager to do it in X years and hasn't been done since this year. And I just noted his scoring wasn't very good when you factor in total number of shots and free throws. And he turned the ball over a lot. It was a good performance. It's a fine performance. But I was just it's kind of my general mark against players like Embiid. I'm like, he's good at things, but he's still very rough in other things. Don't look at this game as if it was a perfect game. It was a very good game with lots of mistakes. And I had someone come back and get mad at me and said, well, you didn't bash this really bad game from Ben Simmons. What are you doing? You're supposed to. And so we've gotten the MO of being negative Nancy's about the NBA immediately. So you started the NBA season on a downer. You basically said to NBA teams that were draft lottery teams last season, things probably aren't going to go well for you. And obviously, you mentioned the Suns explicitly in this article, and a week later, it didn't even take that. They've already fired their coach. Their star player is already complaining on Twitter. They've already lost games. They've given up, I think, the most points in 3 games in NBA history or something. So you were kind of spot on there. I'll let you sum up the article if you'd like.
Okay, so basically the story is, if you go back through the lottery, which goes back to '85, and you look at the history of teams, what they did the year after the lottery, the story is the lottery is supposed to be this opportunity for you to acquire this franchise-changing talent, and so your fortune should change. The average is 10 out of every 14 teams in the lottery are in the lottery the next year. And so if you look at last year, that was the case, 10 teams returned. So your odds are pretty good that if your team is in the lottery this year, that next year you're going to be in lottery again, and that's how your season's going to end. So all the optimism you have on draft night is going to be dashed when they start playing the games, because the player that you acquired is not going to transform your roster at all. And if we look at the lottery teams last year, so let's just go through these. Phoenix, definitely going to be back. Lakers, probably going to be back. Minnesota acquired Jimmy Butler, and that's 18 wins. So I would expect the Minnesota Timberwolves to finally, after 13 years, to make the playoffs. It took them 13 years. They're not Andrew Wiggins ain't the key. It's Jimmy Butler's going to
I wanted to jump in there too, because I had someone note about Andrew Wiggins. He's playing really well. He had a game winner against the Knicks, although it's against the Knicks.
I don't know that he's playing really well. He's playing above average. If you look at his wins produced, it's a little bit above average.
Okay, fine. So
Wiggins, that's really good, but that's hardly the transforming talent we were promised.
But exactly. So I saw some people noting, obviously the Wolves won the Kevin Love trade. And
that's ridiculous. That's silly. Of course they didn't.
And I just noted, if it takes 4 years for it to be obvious you want to trade, and in the meantime, the star you traded away is helping a team go, I will give this. If you're a fan of Kevin Love like we are, this is a rough part. The East has been a terrible conference, and Kevin Love has either been dinged up, he missed one of the first playoffs, and then he was concussed and bad in another playoff. So Kevin Love hasn't been as important in the playoffs as you would have hoped, but he has been a key part as to why that team has been a 50-plus win team over and over and over again.
There's 20 wins for Cleveland since he got there, right? And Andrew Wiggins, in all of his brilliance, has produced so far he has produced a total of 3.
I will say, and I mean, what I'll also say about that trade, what makes this even funnier to me is Kevin Love, there are lots of reasons you can give. I'll say in part injury. He did get injured. That's pretty obvious. In part, it's a weird one, Dave. I know we go back and forth, but like how he's used. If you look at what Kevin Love's strengths were, he's really good at shooting and passing and rebounding. And there are actually new stats that people don't use as much as I was like that would show Kevin Love's touches decreased dramatically from when he was in Minnesota to when he went to Cleveland, in large part because of Kyrie Irving. So Kevin Love, the comparison I made is it'd be if you traded for Miguel Cabrera, and then instead of batting him 4th or 5th, you batted him 8th, and then you also always pinched hit him on his 5th at bat. That's what happened. But so even with that, that's what's funny. I'm going to say Kevin Love underperformed what we expected him on Cleveland, and it's still not even close that the Cavaliers won that trade.
It's not, and it's possible Wiggins will close the gap as time goes by, but boy, you can't really to sit there and say a trade worked out for me, 4, 5, 6 years after the fact. That seems a little ridiculous. No, that definitely did not work out. But they did get Jimmy Butler, and we expect Jimmy Butler to be Jimmy Butler. So I think you can say Minnesota will not be back in the lottery. Sacramento, I think they're. I don't know that they're. I don't know. Dallas looks like a lottery team. New Orleans had trouble beating the Lakers last night.
New Orleans is interesting. They picked up Rajon Rondo, but he's injured. Anthony Davis is always good, but always has injury concerns. DeMarcus Cousins, I'm going to give the weirdest one because I think we liked him in college, and I think we liked him his 3rd season, if I'm not mistaken. He's
not very good.
I'm gonna steal a line.
Shoot well, he turns the ball over all the time. It's just not good.
I'm going to steal a line from a friend of mine. It was Dan Phillip way back in the day when we were talking about the New York Knicks. I almost forgot their name. I almost said Yankees because I was thinking about baseball. But the New York Knicks, we were talking about J.R. Smith, and he said J.R. Smith is so damn talented, but he's just stupid. And as a Denver Nuggets fan, this was so clear, right? It was obvious this guy he would just wait for 3-point shots, wait till Chauncey Billups or Andre Miller or whoever else, one of the good guards in the Nuggets, pass him the ball and he's open at 3. He could have been a great scorer, but he would just take stupid shots, and arguably you could say the same was true about Melo. DeMarcus Cousins the same way. It is obvious that he has all the skill. It is obvious that when he was playing weaker competition, could dominate. But as you're mentioning, turnovers and fouls, those are mistakes. And he takes bad shots. So it's kind of like he makes a lot of bad mistakes, and you're waiting for him to mature, and he just doesn't.
He's not going to. He's never going to do that. He is what he is, and so he's not going to transform. The Pelicans. I don't know. They might make the. Any team that you look at in the lottery right now from last year, if they even make the playoffs, you're talking a lower seed at best, right?
And actually, two teams we're talking, you're talking the Pelicans and you're talking the Wolves. Irrespective of what you think of Cousins, if these teams make the playoffs, it's going to be because they traded for a veteran player that is at least somewhat productive. DeMarcus Cousins.
Well, it's not because they got a guy in the lottery that transformed. That's for sure. That's not what happened here. So, which is what the lottery promises. There is no team that you look at that took a player in the lottery that is going to transform them into a playoff team. And so that's a problem in the NBA, is that they have difficulty evaluating these lottery picks. And so a lot what they focus on primarily when they draft players, and I've written about this, is scoring. Do you play for a winner? Are you young?
I was going to say, I'm impressed you haven't attacked Fultz yet with your scoring point.
Yeah, well, Fultz is a hard one to judge. I mean, I read an article about him just the other day, and it was a Deadspin article, and they pointed out it's pretty clear Fultz seems like he's hurt. Like he's hurt badly. I mean, he changed his shooting form for his free throws because his shoulder hurts. And you're like, why are you even playing? Why are you out there? What's the point? So the Sixers have a problem there, is that Fultz got hurt, and I don't think they should even be playing the guy. I don't, judging by Fultz's college numbers, I don't expect him to be phenomenal in the NBA, but I don't think we can tell when he's not even healthy. So, the Sixers, that they haven't been great so far, but, I don't know. Ben Simmons, I think, I expect him to be good.
But actually, I was going to jump in with that, because you said none of these players are really going to transform because teams pick the wrong players, and I would argue Fultz is one. It's not that Fultz wasn't good in college; it's that Fultz in college, when you compare him to other players, even at the same age, even against the same competition, wasn't at the same echelon. But because he scored a lot of points,
On a bad team.
But the players we like, Ben Simmons, we love Ben Simmons and we love Lonzo Ball.
Yes,
both of those players, they're putting up impressive, I'll say, fantasy stat lines. If you're a fantasy player, you love both of those players already, but they still have major weaknesses. Joel Embiid, who is a player that I'm very interested on, because I actually kind of like him, but you look at his stat line and you're like, you can't stop fouling the guys. You turn the ball over a ton.
Yes.
So these players that we actually liked coming into the NBA from college, it is very rare for them to come in polished. So even
they're not, and it takes a long time to figure this out. Joel Embiid's going to have a huge problem in that they can't play him all the time. He's very injury prone, and so the Sixers, I don't know. So how long have they not been in the playoffs now? How many years have we been in the process now? It's been a while now, right?
I got distracted briefly because I got a ping.
Okay, so they were in the playoffs last in 2012. So we've been doing the process now we're now in the 7th year of the process, or 6th year of the process. So I don't know. This seems like a very long process.
Yeah, I still, this is one of the contentious points that even people that agree with a lot of our analysis I found getting into is you can look at the 76ers and just say, you are making mistakes. You made a bad plan. And while I kind of compared this, I think, to other players where I called them like Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson is a really, really good scorer. He doesn't do anything else. So we can't call Klay Thompson a star because he has one skill and he doesn't do anything else. And when you add everything together, that makes him about average or below average, depending on the year. The 76ers are really good at drafting. We love what they're doing at drafting. They're bad at they're bad at trading. They're bad at signing players. They're bad at re-signing the right players. So that process, it's like you got an A on drafting, but that's 10% of your grade. You got an F on everything else.
Yeah.
So it's funny that,
and they had 3 seasons in a row where they failed to win 20 games. I mean, that's bad for a long time. And basically the curve that their fans are giving them is, if you make the playoffs and you have a couple of players who look like all-stars, I'm going to give you a passing grade, even though you made me go through 3 consecutive years where you failed to win 20 games. And you're like, wow, that's a really generous curve, because if you were a fan of the Spurs, you would have won 50 games every single year across all this time. And they do this every year. They win 50 games. I think you should be looking at your front office and going, really, if you just make the playoffs, we're supposed to be happy with it. 16 teams make the playoffs. That's not a huge challenge. you ought to at least be able to do that. If you're one of the teams that make the playoffs, you're not even in the top 50% because it's 16 out of 30 make the playoffs.
By the way, you're welcome to steal this article idea. Dave, I'll give some background to listeners. Dave has written a ton. I've written a ton. And sometimes I'll say, this is a good idea for an article. And Dave said, I already wrote that. And it's like, yeah, you wrote it for the Wages of Wins 10 years ago. It was read by 1,000 people. Then you can retell the same story sometimes. But I made a joke. I said, instead of a lottery pick, I called it the treadmill pick, which is the 15th pick in the draft. The reason this comes up, by the way, there's a player right now that people are calling the MVP favorite right now, which is, I'm skeptical to believe the voters have changed, but it's Giannis Antetokounmpo, who plays for. I can't.
I like that you can pronounce his name. I appreciate that.
Yeah, but he. I was. It's funny.
I just can't say that I can do that.
I got his last name at one point because I learned that, and I was messing up his first name because I was saying Giannis. It's actually Giannis. Okay, but people are calling him an MVP favorite, and he's playing amazing. He is an amazing player. But he was picked 15th in the draft lottery. There are some other players that are our favorites, including
Kawhi Leonard. Is it Kawhi Leonard 15th?
Kawhi Leonard was picked 15th. Brent Berry, one of our favorites, was picked 15th. I was making the joke that you'd rather have the 15th pick than the number one pick in terms of some of the stars it's produced. Jimmy Butler was picked in the second round, for instance. DeAndre Jordan was picked in the second round. In the NBA right now, you could construct an all-star team that could arguably, at least compete with the Golden State Warriors, right? You could have Giannis, Jimmy Butler, Kawhi, DeAndre Jordan. I got to be forgetting. There's got to be an easy four or another small forward. Oh, yeah, DeAndre Jordan. Or not DeAndre Jordan, Draymond Green. Said DeAndre Jordan twice. So I just.
Who's your point guard on that team?
What? Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Really?
Yeah.
Does he work as a point guard?
He does. But what? Where have you been? Clearly, no one's watching the Bucks. Clearly,
nobody ever watched the Bucks.
Yeah, that was a major change last season. Two coaches, what they did. Mike D'Antoni and Jason Kidd, they changed their point guard. Mike D'Antoni put James Harden at the point guard. Jason Kidd put Giannis at the point guard, and it seemed to work out really well.
Box Score Geeks does not list him as a point guard.
He is impossible because he is a point guard power forward, and we have an algorithm that adjusts players, and it is not like I'll put it to you this way.
He doesn't get the assist of a point guard, though. I mean, he does get some assists.
If you look
for a small forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I actually wrote an article looking at some of the dates we could talk. So it's like he is able to play point guard and power forward, and I'm saying on the team that I constructed, Giannis, Butler.
I bet you can find a point guard that an actual real point guard, right?
Why are you insulting Giannis so much, Dave? But anyway, so sorry.
I think he's great. I'm just saying, you could find a point guard, right? I mean, I could find a point guard that's.
If I'm allowed to put a 7-footer almost at point guard, I'm going to take advantage of that. But anyway,
Kyle Lowry, though, is his point guard. He's
all right. We'll do Kyle Lowry too. Lowry, right? He was picked, I think, second round or late. Okay, so
he's like 24.
My point was that you could find all of these players. Even
you got to remember, in the NBA, positions don't matter anymore. You can play anybody at any position. You can play 5 centers if you want, or 5 point guards, or 7 first basemen, or 18 quarterbacks. You can do anything you want. There are no positions. I keep hearing that. But there are no positions.
Sorry to get off on that tangent, but just coming back to the original point being, there are lots of good players.
There are lots of good players outside the NBA lottery. There are tons of them.
Yeah, so that's it. I'm trying to think of anything else I want to say on this article, other than just being. Actually, and I have one more point. 2 of our friends, Brian Foster, who normally produces the normal Box Score Geek show, and Jeremy Britton, both of them recall that they became Warriors fans for, I think they're this old, like the Warriors playing really well in the 70s or 80s, because they're that old. But to that point, when the 76ers miss the playoffs and don't have good seasons in the hopes of getting a star, even if they make the playoffs and have 1 good game or 2 good games, don't forget, right before the process happened, they made the playoffs and had an upset in the first round and went further than expected because of some injury. You make fans when your team wins and just random people watch. People like myself with the Denver Nuggets, they got Dikembe Mutombo. They were good for a little bit. I enjoyed watching him, and I'm a basketball fan. You are leaving fans on the table, and that's what your research even says. Your research says fans are fans of teams because they have a history. That's been your point about women's sports. Women's sports, we can't judge them yet because they need to build a legacy. And your argument for fast pitch, for USA softball, for the WNBA is the great news is we have some great athletes making a legacy that in 20 years people will look back on. The 76ers process is actively working against making a legacy, which means even if they're good in 5 or 6 years, they're going to have left out a generation of fans that would have watched them if they'd just been in the playoffs.
Yes, and the thing is that their whole focus on that you have to find these players in the top of the draft, and so far, it's been very hit and miss. I don't, it's not clear to me that they found a whole collection of stars at the top of the draft, and so this whole process thing is just, to me, just a bunch of nonsense. I just don't buy that makes any sense at all, and so I think the Sixers fans got conned, and so, but. We'll see. Well, I don't think the current Sixers are going to be championship contenders anytime soon. So.
I mean, the huge part is a lot of what they did in the draft lottery, which we're a fan of, is they gambled on a bunch of players with injury concerns, which is fine, but you can't expect all of your players with injury concerns to all come back healthy and be your team. You get a few of them and you get another team around them. And so that's a problem. If you talk to any 76ers fans, it'll go something like this, myself included. Well, if Fultz can develop and Simmons can stay healthy and Embiid can stay healthy, and and this guy can come back and they can get one more play. If you have to, you can say the Warriors just lost 2 games. I can still say the Warriors are going to make the playoffs. The Warriors are going to be a title contender unless 3 of their players get injured. Boom, one sentence. But some of these teams, these process teams, I have to list 10 conditionals for them to make the playoffs.
Yes. A lot of guesses. So yeah, it's not. Yeah, well, it's going to be great once the right now. If you're an NBA analyst, and that's how you base your stories on, you got to have the data, and so we need them to play another 15, 20 games. So for the next month, I'm going to be probably I'll be writing more about USA softball. I'll probably write a little bit about college sports. And then we'll come back to the NBA probably in December. And so because we need to have this, once we get this data going, then we can start writing a lot of articles on the NBA. So we'll see how the storylines play out. And there are all sorts of storylines that we can follow. Will Carmelo Anthony transform the Thunder? And probably not. And so we can do all that. That'll be fun. But it's going to take us a few weeks to get to that point. Right now, it's really tempting to look at the data we have right now and draw some conclusions. But remember, nobody's played more than 3 games, and anybody in 3 games can be great. And so it's fascinating how people react to all these very tiny samples, because people look at the first 3 games and draw sweeping conclusions. No one looks at 3 games in February and draws any sweeping conclusions.
The only time I've seen that is if you're a title team and you lose 3 games, then it's like, oh, they've been figured out. And I've found a lot of narrative has to be attached to those. So it'll be like the Warriors lose 3 games and one of those was against the Spurs or one of those was against the Cavs. And then people go, oh my God, have they been figured out or whatever?
Yeah, there's no figuring out in basketball. No one figures out anything. There's no figuring out.
By the way,
no, Stephen Curry's been in the league for a very long time. No one has figured him out. They're not going to figure him out.
Well, the counterback I'll give you, the figure it out solution always seems to be, which I found on like the Thunder figured out the Warriors a few seasons ago. And what they did is they had Enes Kanter, who we say is a great player, and he had been a bench player. And they had Steven Adams, who's a great player, and they started him. And they said, what if we play these 2 guys together? And they did better. And people said, well, it's a scheme thing. See, they were playing a better scheme. And an argument would be they weren't playing this good player, and they started playing him more, and they started doing better. So that seems something teams figure out is, what if we play our good players?
Yeah, what if we – exactly. What if we – that's my scheme. What if we play our good players? Oh, okay. Well, why don't you try that? Yeah, it always seems to be like that. That's what they do. Yeah, it's just – yeah, basketball analysis is so incredibly messed up. It suffers so much from small sample bias and confirmation bias, and it's such a simple game. If you look at the numbers, you can figure out who's productive and who's not. Play the productive ones, don't play the unproductive ones, and then you win. And you have NBA people going, well, we tried this. It's like, quit doing that. Just don't stop doing that.
I'll give a counter on that, which is to say, I'm not saying offensive schemes don't matter. They clearly do. I'm not saying that defensive schemes don't matter. I'm not saying synergy doesn't matter. But it's so funny to watch teams worry about those things before they even have a complete roster of productive players. The argument we will always give is get 5 above average players on the court, and then if you want to tinker, go for it. Like, since my Denver Nuggets, I'm watching people argue about defense, about why they're bad at defense, about other schemes, about if these players will gel. The Nuggets don't have a point guard.
Well, if schemes really truly mattered, if that was the issue, then what you would see is player performance, like you see in football. Player performance would bounce all over the place. You'd have some years you're great and some years you're not. And that is just something you don't see in basketball. You just don't see it. Give you an example from football. The Lions drafted a guy named Travis Swanson and put him in at center. And he didn't play his rookie year. He played his second year. His second year, he was the worst center in all of football. He was awful. And so they drafted another center to take his job, and he beat him out in training camp. He comes back for his third year, and he's like the top 3 center in the league. You don't see that in basketball. You're not going to have a guy who's the worst player in the league suddenly become one of the top 3 players in the league. That you don't do that. It's not a scheme thing. It's you're either good or you're not good, and that's it.
Again, I still push back a little, but I guess what I think we're saying similar things. I'm saying the lion's share, majority share is just, are they a productive player? And then what bugs me is everybody's focusing on this other stuff here. Can I get defense? Can I get synergy? And I go, why are you worried about that before productive? Like that is
you have productive players. You have productive players, you win. And again, it's not like football. Football, you can't do stat analysis football very easily because it is the case that interactions of players make all the difference in the world. In football and basketball, it doesn't. And the reason you can tell it doesn't. LeBron James has played with lots of different coaches and lots of different teammates, and he's always been lots of really good. And it just doesn't make any difference. And the other team knows when you're playing a LeBron James team or you're playing, same thing with any other star player, you know they're getting the ball. LeBron James could come across the court and announce what he's going to do. I am now going to score. I am going to score in the next 5 seconds. LeBron James beat the Indiana Pacers in a playoff game a few years ago where Paul George, who's another top 50 player in the world, is guarding him. And LeBron James won the game on a dunk. He drove past him and dunked the ball. In what kind of sport does that happen?
Well, I mean,
did he tell Paul George he was going to do it before he did it? I'm now going past you. Goodbye.
I'll talk back to baseball and then we can finish up. Like I recalled, right, that's been a big deal in football and baseball, right? Stealing signs, seeing what the opponent.
Yes, exactly. In football and baseball, if you steal my strategy, you beat me. If you know what I'm going to do, I got no chance to win. If the pitcher's on the mound, if Clayton Kershaw's on the mound or Justin Verlander's on the mound, and he says, I am now going to throw my fastball on the outside corner, every single baseball hitter hits a home run.
Well, maybe not, but they'll hit, maybe not.
They're going to smack the hell out of that. It only works because they don't know. That's why it works. And the same thing as football. If Tom Brady were to come to the line of scrimmage and say, okay, this play, Gronkowski, 15-yard out. I'm throwing right there. Okay, everyone's intercepting that pass. It's not going to work. If they know what you're doing, you have no chance of winning. But in basketball, the Utah Jazz did a pick and roll with John Stockton, Karl Malone for 15 years. Everyone knew that play. Nobody's confused by that play. We all know you're doing that. There's no strategy here. They could say, pick and roll now. Is it going to work? Yes, of course it's going to work. You have no defense against this.
I'll give you a bit of feedback, Dave. Ironically, on feedback, either you're going to have to change your mic settings. This was actually mentioned on another podcast, John, or not yell, because actually your mic, when you start yelling, that's giving feedback. So
I mean, that's the thing about basketball. Same thing. That's why Wilt Chamberlain, why the 3-second rule was invented. Why was the 3-second rule invented? Because there is literally no defense against Wilt Chamberlain standing underneath the basket and scoring. None. If he just stood there, your play on every single offensive possession is, Wilt, here's the ball, dunk it.
Exactly.
That would be it. The game's over. So they said, okay, one rule change. You can only stand for 3 seconds. Okay, that makes it a little more challenging. Just a little, though. He's still going to score 50 points.
All right, so we took this long, but that's fine because we had 2 articles.
Yes, we did.
Back. You already teased your next piece is going to be on college softball.
Yes, college softball.
Which players should play in the Olympics? I want to see your opinion on as how much they would compete with your pro team. And that's it. So yeah, if you have questions for Dave, you can leave them in the comments below the YouTube. You can leave them in the comments at Box Score Geeks. You can ping Dave on myself directly on Twitter, though that's a mixed bag as to if we'll remember to answer. Again, Wages of Wins on Twitter. Professor Dave Berri, economics at Southern Utah University. I need to get a better tease for that. I mean, that's all I got. So Dave, I'll let you get the capper and then we'll head out.
All right, that's great. It was great. We'll talk again next week.
All right, sounds good.